How are you doing today, Neil?
I'm good. How are you, Zay?
Doing good. Hey, I got a quick question. Do you go to the wellness center?
I do.
Do you go in the mornings, early mornings?
Typically early in the morning. I see him there a lot of times.
Ah, okay. That's why. Also, before that, months ago, a year and a half ago when I started a new position at the school, I thought you were my boss because you and Dr. Huber kind of look very, very similar. And I was like, wait, is he also the dean? And then also at the med school. It was kind of cool. But I see you all the time over there. And I was like, is that him? And then today, I think I saw you on the second floor. And then my wife, Maya, she's like, might as well just do the interview right now. I was like, no. But how's everything going so far?
Good. We just started summer at the law school and are doing renovations in the building. And students got out a couple weeks ago. So good.
When does school start and when does it end for y'all?
So we end the same time as the rest of the university, first week of March, May. And then we start in early August. So the med school actually starts mid-July before us, but I think the next one in there, we always start first week of August.
How many students do you usually guys have?
So average class last few years has been mid 80s. We'd have 80 to 85. The last quarter century, it's in the mid 70s. We've had kind of a higher enrollment the last few years based on targeted work to recruit more students. Katie Ulrich, who've interviewed before, is our director of admissions and marketing. She and Caitlin Freer do a great job recruiting students. Okay.
Yeah. I also know a few of the students there. I know, I think they just graduated. So you probably know them, like Tori.
Yep.
Yeah. Taylor Dickman right now, Julianne Severson's in there and all that. So, but it's usually 3 years, right?
Yeah. 3-year program. You can graduate in 2.5, and a few people do. And then we have a 3+3 program where your first year of law school is your last year of undergrad. We have quite a few students who do that. And so that shortens it too. But overall, undergrad and law school is about 7 years.
So is this what you wanted to do since you were younger? Like, hey, I want to become the dean of the law school. Or how did that come?
Absolutely not. I never thought I would be in higher ed. I never thought I'd be in legal ed. I always pretty much wanted to be a lawyer and have been a lawyer in a variety of capacities, but never really saw myself as a law professor or a dean. In 2017-18, when Tom Gooey announced he was stepping down, there was a lot going on in legal education that was tough nationwide. And I thought there were some things that I had experience with. I'd been, on the board of bar examiners. I'd been involved in the legislative process, been a lawyer in a variety of capacities where maybe I would be helpful to the school. And the contribution of the school to South Dakota is really hard to overstate. I care a lot about South Dakota and I care a lot about the law. And so for me, those two things came together in law school and I want to be part of that.
And you said you want to become a lawyer since you were younger too, right?
Yeah. Youngest of 4 ranch boys. And they work too hard and take too much risk for me to want to do that. So I want to be a lawyer.
Really? So how does that track work? Like, what do you got to do to become, if someone wants to say, or if they're like, hey, I want to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
What do they got to do?
So to go to law school, you have to have an undergraduate degree. It can be in anything. A lot of people who are thinking about law school ask, what should I study as an undergrad? And I will tell them what you're passionate about. I studied political science as an undergrad. A lot of people do that. Criminal justice, history, English, philosophy. Those are pretty common things. But there was a really brilliant guy in my law school class who was a music major, and you'll see hard science majors. So you need a BA, BS, or beyond to go to law school. And then you need to go to law school for, the program is 3 years, most places. You can see some part-time programs where that extends, and that's it. So undergraduate degree, and then go to an accredited law school in the United States, and there you go.
And then you take your bar exam and then you're good, or am I missing other things?
Yeah, so most people take a bar exam. There are definitely people who go to law school with no intent to practice and they don't take the bar. You'll see people who are going into business settings or who want to go into higher education or other places and they don't take the bar, but most people take the bar. And, when we talk about the bar, there's actually 50 of them. Every state is slightly different in how it approaches bar admissions, although everybody except Louisiana uses the materials produced by the National Conference of Bar Examiners in Madison, Wisconsin. They just score them and approach them slightly differently. So most of us test the same stuff, but there are 50 different requirements for admission. They kind of fit together in different ways.
If you are enjoying this and want to be a guest or sponsor, email me at vermillionunplugged@gmail.com. And then what kind of lawyer are you?
That's a great question. So when I first came out of law school, I clerked for a federal judge in Minneapolis for a year. A lot of students do that after law school. It's a chance to kind of continue to get your education, get some practical experience. Wonderful mentor from a woman named Diana Murphy. And then I came back and practiced in Pierre. I was a private practice lawyer at a firm called May, Adam, Gertis & Thompson. We did a lot of different things. I personally did about a quarter of my work lobbying with the South Dakota legislature, about a quarter of my work doing defense work for state and local governments when they were sued. About a quarter of my work was criminal defense. And then because we're a small town, about a quarter was just like other stuff, right? Friends want their wills done, or they're doing a corporation, or just things that come in the door. And that's where I was for about 9 years. And then Governor Mike Rounds approached me in 2007 and asked me to come be chief of staff. We'd done a lot of work for him outside. A mentor of mine, a guy named Brent Wilbur, had done a ton of work for Mike and for other governors and had involved me in that. And when Brent passed away, I started doing that work. And the governor asked me, will you come do this job? Really not a question you think you're going to get asked. And so I asked him, why would I do this? And he gave a great answer, which is you can make a difference in people's lives every day. Talked about that with my wife, Molly, and she gave an even better answer, which is if we don't do this, we're not the kind of people we thought we were. Meaning that you have an opportunity to care for and serve the people around you, you should take it. And so I went and did that with the full intent to, be up there for the rest of Mike's term. That was about 3 years, and then go back to my firm. And I realized while I was there, I missed being a lawyer day to day, but I also really liked the public policy and personnel work that I was able to do as chief of staff. And as it turned out, as Mike's term was ending, the federal public defender job for North and South Dakota came open. And so that office does criminal defense work for people who can't afford lawyers in North and South Dakota, in particular, a lot of Indian country crime. And I had done that work on an appointed basis and always really enjoyed it. And it was the intersection of being a lawyer, being an administrator. And so I applied for that and was chosen and did that. Loved that work. Oversaw offices in Fargo, Bismarck, Pierre, Rapid City, and Sioux Falls. Never thought I would leave. And then, I talked about before in 2017, thereabouts, when Dean Gui was stepping down, the deanship came open and it seemed like a thing I should think about. And so I applied and here I am.
Is there any other goals? Do you want to be like the president of USD or?
I love the job I have. Of all the jobs I've had, this is in so many ways the best one. Shaping young lawyers and being just a little bit of an influence on the kind of people and lawyers they're going to be, being able to draw on experiences I've had, the mentorship that's been offered to me by USD lawyers. I tell people all the time, I didn't go to USD for law school. I went to the University of Minnesota, but I wouldn't be where I am without USD lawyers. And so there is a degree of paying forward the mentorship from Brent, his wife, Lori, Rob Anderson, Randy Seiler, John Guin, Steve Zinner. I can just go on for hours of USD lawyers who've shaped me and the law in South Dakota, and trying to shape that next generation of lawyers to be skilled, to be thoughtful in their practice. And when you come into the law school, you'll see the words excellence, service, leadership. Those are our core values. And to have a part in showing young lawyers how to excel in their craft, how to serve the people around them, and how to accept the opportunities and obligations of leadership that'll come their way is really a cool thing to get to do.
See, I had a misconception about lawyers. I thought I get my information from Google and TV shows, which is not great. I always thought lawyers were always in the courtroom, but I didn't know there was different types. It's not just all was prosecution and all that. It's nothing like that. Or my bad, it's not always like that, right?
Absolutely. And so, a lot of us get our picture of lawyers from TV and movies, and that's not a bad picture. If you've ever watched Law and Order, there's a lot in there that is accurate. There's a lot that's not. Trials are not over in 10 minutes. But, anywhere that the law is touching human activity, which is to say basically everywhere, there's a lawyer, right? And so if you go into corporate boardrooms and HR departments and contracting departments, there are lawyers there. If you go into the committee rooms of federal, state, local, and tribal governments, there are lawyers in those rooms helping make decisions or as elected officials themselves. If you go into courtrooms, there are obviously lawyers defending and prosecuting criminal cases and civil cases. But, there are lawyers everywhere you look doing lots of things that you think about lawyers doing, trying cases, writing contracts, writing wills, doing those things. And then there are lawyers who are running businesses. Bill Gasson, who's the head of Sanford Health, has a law degree, right? Does he use it on a daily? Yeah, not in the way that we think about a traditional lawyer doing, but I'm sure it influences what he does. So there are lawyers everywhere you expect to find them, in a lot of places you don't.
How come I'm not going too off topic, so I'm gonna talk about a little more about like court cases.
Yeah.
How come? Because I always wondered this. Like, for example, when there's like, we'll give an example, like a robbery or a murder, something like that. How come there's a lawyer defending the person that did the crime if he is guilty? Or I don't know, maybe there's something that I'm not understanding.
Yeah, it's a great question. And people ask that all the time. And I'm going to give kind of two answers. One is because constitutionally in the United States, we say that people are presumed to be innocent and people have a right to have a lawyer represent them in the Fifth and Sixth Amendments to our Constitution. Another way to think about that is we think that it is important that our law is not what some individual says, but what is the product of our public deliberative process where we make law. And then we think it's important that that law is public. It's written down. You and I can look it up. We can know what the law is. We think that's important. And we think it's important that before the law is brought to bear against any citizen, they have a right to have an expert, a lawyer, explain to them what the law is, advocate for how the law may or may not apply to them. And we think that's so important that even when that person can afford a lawyer themselves, we provide one for them at public expense, meaning that whether you're the wealthiest or the poorest person in the United States, you have this right to only have the full force of law brought to bear against you once it's gone through that public process. And that's in the Constitution. So that's answer number one. The second question you ask is really a great question that anyone who's done public defense gets asked a lot, which is, how do you represent those people?
Yeah.
And what I would tell people all the time is, one, just being the person who gives life to these ideas that I just talked about in the Constitution is really important work. The system is based on having people in those roles. Two, the system just works better when people do this. I mean, there are a lot of instances where when I would do criminal defense, you'd investigate the case, you'd look at what the prosecution alleged, you would talk to this person, and in fact, they had done what was alleged, and you navigate them to a plea agreement that is more favorable in terms of sentencing recommendations or things, and the system just kind of runs efficiently. But even more fundamentally, and I would always tell young defenders this, when you are there with a person who's maybe in the most difficult moment of their life, you can listen to them and hear their story and what's going on. And a lot of those folks have never had anyone listen to them. You can honestly tell them what their options are and are not in some instances, right? I mean, some of the hardest but most important work you do sometimes is talking to the person who should in fact plead guilty and making them understand why and how that's a least bad outcome for them under those circumstances. And then you can go into court and tell their story without fear. That is, to my way of thinking, providing this person basic human dignity. And that is a profound opportunity and responsibility that I think is central to what the American justice system is. It does reflect and protect basic human dignity. And so to me, the question of why do we do this for people, particularly people who may in fact be guilty, because that's what we've decided we're going to do constitutionally in the United States. And that's what we should decide to do to each other and for each other as human beings.
Because a lot of people don't know. Well, I'll be the first one to admit, even I don't know. Like, I guess the law, or what you can or can't do. I'll give like one example. Maybe it's not a good example. But the first time we used a lawyer was, what was it, like 5 years ago? It was for immigration.
Yeah.
So my wife, right now she's a resident. She came here legally. Everything's fine. But the first time, so she's been here a few times, but it was like during that COVID stuff. She came from Mexico it was the Dallas airport, and she got to go through, immigration. And then she was texting me, and she got stopped. And she was there for a while, and they were questioning her, this and that. But they were saying that guy for immigration was saying that, you're not supposed to come here. Next time you're supposed to have like $5,000. I recommend you not come here because you're probably going to do something this, and saying that, well, your extension, you have, I think you could stay here for 3 months because it was supposed to be a vacation, 3 months. I'm going to put 3 months, but you should return in 1 month. Stuff like that. I was like, is that like legal or something? And that's when we got an immigration lawyer. And then for the also a progress. And yeah, he was saying, no, they're just trying to scare you and this and that. I'm like, but it's kind of surprising why some people are, I don't know, some people are just like that.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things are on. One, some of what the law reflects is very simple. We have laws that say it's illegal to murder another person. That's a thing that's just written on all of our hearts as human beings, right? We know you shouldn't do that. Even though there are instances, right, when someone defends themselves and things like that, where in fact, maybe it's justifiable. So, you have very simple ideas that are reflected in law that sometimes become complicated when you respond to individual engagements of human beings. You have more complex areas of law. Immigration is incredibly complex, given the nature in which people come to the country, right? People are coming to work on certain types of visas, people who are seeking refugee status, right? You have people who maybe have come not initially legally, but are establishing lives, and they've got children, tax, business structures. There are lots of areas in which the day-to-day things that human beings do are really complicated to try and regulate through law, and you need someone to help you understand that stuff, because just like you, even though I'm a lawyer, whole parts of my day that are regulated by law where I don't understand that law. And then, the last thing I would say is the law is disembodied, right? The law is stuff in books, it's stuff in regulations, and it's given life through the actions of human beings. This person that your wife encountered who is enforcing the immigration law. And sometimes people make mistakes in doing that. Sometimes individual humans make choices that are unjust or wrong. And so it's important to have the lawyers making sure that the law is given effect in an accurate and just way. So there's a lot going on in the law, because I just tell people all the time, the law is the most human of enterprises. It regulates every aspect of human conduct, and it's dependent on the fallible actions of human beings. And so it's just an endlessly fascinating enterprise.
And with different lawyers, can they, even though you have, like, say, someone written the law, but can different people interpret it in different ways? Or it's actually, no, it says like this, it's not that complex.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, people can interpret it very different ways. And, there's a lot of what we do in law school, which is teaching students not just what the law is substantively, but the process of how you read and apply the law to individual facts, both cases that are decided by the South Dakota or United States Supreme Court and other courts, statutes and regulations. And, I teach a class on legislation and statutory interpretation. And one of the things that we do is talk about how very simple legal texts can suddenly get complicated. There's a example that we use every year, talking about a speed limit that says no vehicle may travel more than 35 miles an hour on Cherry Street. Mm-hmm. And so I will ask students, all right, the dean of the law school is late getting to class one morning, and the Vermilion police stop him going at 45. Did he violate the statute? And they all say yes, because of course he did. And then I say there's a robbery at the Casey's, and we get into a great discussion about which Casey's students go to, because there are strong opinions about North or South Side Casey's. And the police department goes 50 miles an hour to respond. Did the police officer violate the statute? And you suddenly get students who hem and haw because, well, yeah, literally on the words of the statute, but is that what the legislature meant? And then you get instances where the text itself is just ambiguous and confusing. So wrestling with how you take a law and apply it to a particular set of facts, and the ambiguities that can creep in either from facts that were unanticipated, changes in circumstances from when that law was written, or just the inherent gaps that exist in any text. That's really where the fun stuff starts to happen as lawyers, where you're interpreting and applying.
Ooh, what other examples do you guys, I guess, give? Because that was actually a cool one. That was real cool.
Yeah, so that's a good one. There's a really traditional example that was written by some famous law professors in the 30s, who were some of the first people who dealt with statutory interpretation, about a city ordinance that says no vehicles in park. There are no vehicles in the park. Well, does that apply to a little kid who's riding his tricycle? Does that apply to a statue that, has a tank from World War II in there? That's a really common one because it gets at a lot of stuff. I use a lot of them that touch on earlier cases that have been decided. We use one about taking or harassing protected species because that's kind of a good illustration. The reality is, if you find almost any law that exists in the statute books and you play with the facts a little bit, you can find some instances in which it may be ambiguous.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I guess, for example, like the vehicles, because I'm just thinking, like a car or truck, but I guess someone could be like saying, well, it's something that you could maybe ride or transport or this. I'm like, I guess. But
yeah, we run that scenario. We run through bicycles. We run through kids on a skateboard, a motorized stroller for cars. We start with a Toyota Camry. Everybody knows that's a vehicle. But then what do you do when you get to the 4-wheeler or gator that the Parks Department people are using to care for the flowers? And what do you do when somebody breaks their leg in the park and an ambulance needs to come in there and pick them up? And so you start running into instances where, does this fact, right? Does the bike, does the skateboard, does the motorized scooter, does the 4-wheeler fit this picture of what's a vehicle? And then you run into instances where something that would clearly traditionally be a vehicle, like an ambulance, may not be what we think the legislature meant, because of course they wanted an ambulance to be able to go in there and care for somebody. So then you start playing with, when we're reading legal texts, are we trying to understand what the words mean, which we call textualism? Are we trying to understand what the legislature meant, which we call intentionalism? Or are you trying to understand what the legislature was trying to do, which we call purposivism? And we apply those different regimes and tools to figure out how we read the statute.
Oh, snap. Okay, here's another example. So what was this, like? Oh yeah, years ago when I was in school, I worked at Best Buy, a retail company or retail store. And the first thing they told us, they said, hey, if someone's stealing something, do not interfere. I'm like, they're taking something. Wouldn't you want to stop them? They're like, don't interfere. And they said something about, yeah, because if that person gets hurt or something, then they could sue the company. I'm like, what? How does that even make sense? But how do you interpret that? Because I think that's common in other stores too. They say, hey, just let them go.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on the law of the state you're in, right? And so that's going to be decided. So you're talking about what people would call torts, which is when you injure another person, and some of that's decided by cases and jurisdictions. Some of it's decided by statute. South Dakota has some tort law set by statute. I would suspect for the company, there's a lot of stuff in play. One is they don't want to incur potential liability from someone who stole and may make a claim, because they'll have video of that and they'll go have the police deal with it. And they probably don't want to deal with the potential for injury to their employees, right? Because you don't know if that person is going to fight back. And so, one of the things that lawyers do is take the law that exists and we assess what it means and doesn't mean. But it also requires us to do some of the things you're talking about to decide, all right, what's the policy we're going to develop if I'm a private company responding to some of this law? How much risk do we want to take on? And is it better to say, well, we'll incur the potential loss of some shopliftings that we don't ultimately stop or respond to not have the risk of injury to our employees or the person. So lawyers are also going beyond just looking at what the law says to make some prudential decisions with our clients about what they want to do looking forward.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. And also, how does a lawsuit, because I think when I think of lawyers, I think, okay, lawsuits, courtrooms, I think, but how does that work? How does someone, I don't know. What is a lawsuit technically, and how does that stuff work?
Yeah, great question. So, lawyers would use, we like lingo. And so we would call a lawsuit an action, right? And there are two kinds. There's a criminal action. So if you're going to have a criminal action, what you do is the assigned prosecutor would evaluate whether there is the possibility, what we would call probable cause, that someone broke a criminal law. So, there are lots of levels of prosecutors here in Clay County. Mike Smith, who's the state's attorney, makes decisions about whether he's going to charge cases. The attorney general has prosecutorial authority across South Dakota and can also initiate charges, although generally they do that in coordination with the local state's attorney. And then, tribal governments have their own prosecutors, and they've got jurisdiction within Indian country over certain people in there. That's pretty complicated jurisdictional question. And then the federal prosecutor, the United States attorney, that's appointed in each district across the United States within the hierarchy of the Department of Justice, can bring certain crimes. So that's how you'd start a criminal action. The prosecutor who's appointed and has jurisdiction makes a decision to charge or not charge. A civil action is between people, right? It's possible for entities of government to be in civil actions. Most commonly, they're between you and I, right? So if you and I had a contract and I was going to fix your house, I was going to put a new roof on your house and I didn't do it, you could start a civil action saying, well, Neil and I had a contract. He didn't do the work. He breached the contract. He owes me, this amount of money for the contract. And so you'll see those types of actions for contracts, for torts where somebody gets hurt, divorce actions, all sorts of things where two or more private individuals have claims against each other, and that's initiated by the person who claims they were wronged.
Oh, okay. Oh, with that example, that's actually a good example. The contract or a contractor person. What would happen in that case if, for example, let's say, you were fixing my roof and you didn't do the job, and we signed it, and it says, you were going to do this, and I'm saying, well, I don't want to pay. This is not, you messed it up.
Yep.
What would the scenario be like?
Yeah. So, I mean, you file that lawsuit in the place where this took place or where the person is generally. And then from there, in a civil case, you'll do what we call discovery, where you're able to get more of the facts, and you can ask for documents, and you can take statements under oath from people. Like we might both be deposed, where our lawyers would get a chance to ask each other questions, right, about what happened. And then a lot of civil cases, most civil and criminal cases actually settle either through plea agreements on the criminal side or through private settlements on the civil side. And so that would be where you and I just, through our lawyers, agree, Neil agreed to fix the roof for $1,000, didn't fully do it, but he did some work. And so you say, you know what, I'll pay him $500, and he walks away, and we all kind of get something that's a little bit better than nothing.
Yeah.
Or you can go have a trial, and you can have a trial either in front of a judge or more commonly in front of a jury, which are just people in the area who are chosen from the jury list, and they will decide the facts. So they'll decide, okay, was there a contract? Did Neil violate it? And then they'll decide, well, how much is Jose damaged, right? How much does Neil owe Jose for the failure to follow through on the contract? So juries decide what the facts are and how they apply to the circumstances. Judges apply the law on those circumstances, and that's how those move forward.
Is there a reason why it wouldn't go to trial? Because I've heard from some of the lawsuits saying that they say actually the majority of cases don't even go to trial. It's usually settled. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of reasons people settle, right? I mean, lawyers don't work for free generally, right? And so, I mean, you're weighing how much it's going to cost for me to get to trial. What do I think the probability of me winning at trial is? Is there just an economic reason that I may want to resolve this case through settlement where we both get some of what we want? And that's, better than the risk of at a trial. The reality is, there is a winner and a loser for the most part, right? I mean, you can kind of get some mixed verdicts, but as opposed to going to the zero sum choice, most cases settle because of the potential to find a solution where everybody gets some of what they want. And, the economics of it matters a lot for people. The time, the expense, the stress, the hassle matters quite a bit.
Ooh, okay. Now I'm gonna go a little more off topic. Kind of. I'm thinking about some other stuff. It's kind of. Are you familiar with the show Better Call Saul?
I've never seen it. I know the setup, and I've seen enough Breaking Bad to know who Saul Goodman is.
Okay, so you've seen Breaking Bad though, right?
A little bit, not a lot.
Is that what you've seen? Is he is there a type of, are there lawyers kind of like that similarly? Maybe-ish or not?
I mean, my sense of the show is Saul is a pretty intellectually brilliant but ethically challenged lawyer. He's a pretty ethically flawed human being. So are there lawyers who don't comply with the ethical rules? Yeah, unfortunately there are, right? And the profession regulates itself. Every state has some version of what's called a disciplinary board. And if we find that a lawyer has broken our rules of professional responsibility, which set our obligations to care for our clients' interests, not our own, to care for their property, to follow the rules and laws that apply, the disciplinary board can evaluate that lawyer's conduct. They can recommend reprimands, sanctions, even disbarment. And, there are instances in which lawyers can commit crimes, right? I mean, so I saw enough Breaking Bad at the end to know that Saul Goodman was in an ongoing criminal conspiracy with Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. And you can't, as a lawyer, be part of illegal activity. So yeah, Saul's an interesting character. He's a really bad lawyer in real life, though.
Okay, because I remember one of the examples. If I remember right, I'll probably forget some of the details. So Jesse Pinkman, I think the house is now his parents', and then he wants to buy the house. So if people want to know, Jesse Pinkman's lawyer is Saul Goodman. So there's Saul Goodman with Jesse's parents and then their lawyer, and they're talking about, he said, that my client, they don't know it's Jesse. My client wants to buy the house. I forgot the price, but let's say it was like $500,000 they wanted. And he said, oh, well, my client will give you $250,000. And they're like, no, why would that's like half or something like that. So they're about to leave. And then Saul Goodman's like, well, it's funny that you didn't mention that there was like a meth lab in there.
Yeah.
So that's why I was wondering, like, does that count? Like, is he supposed to say that? Is he not? Or is just information they get?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be very circumstance specific, but the example you're talking about, lawyers have obligations of candor. So if I go into court representing a client, one thing I can't do is affirmatively misrepresent the facts of the law. So if I know that my client ran the meth lab there, I can't go in and say, well, that's not a thing that exists. I can't fail to acknowledge a case or a statute that controls the circumstances. We talked about criminal cases. Criminal defendants don't have to admit they're guilty, right? They can put the government to their proof, but you can't get up and lie. Lawyers can't affirmatively misrepresent. And there are instances in which lawyers have to be candid. They've got to disclose things. And there's some where they don't, right? It's just very circumstance dependent. But I would tell you, a key takeaway about lawyer ethics should be, if it would feel wrong for you to do it on a daily basis, it's probably wrong for a lawyer to do it. If it feels like it's lying for a lawyer. If it feels like it's kind of slimy, there's a pretty good chance the lawyer shouldn't do those things either.
Is there any like rules to being a lawyer, or unwritten rules? I know it's supposed to be confidential. Yep. I think that part. But is there any other things that similar with like doctors? Hey, they're supposed to do this.
Yeah. So there is the rules of professional responsibility. There's a model set of rules that every jurisdiction has based their rules on. Then there's some small, differences within jurisdictions about exactly what those rules encompass. But in general, right, if I'm a lawyer, I have to keep confidential information my client gives to me about the representation. I have to respect and care for property I'm holding for my client, right? So sometimes if you settle one of these civil cases, I have to hold those proceeds of the settlement till I distribute them to my client. I can't go use them for my own purpose. I have to be candid to the court and other counsel. So I have to be honest about what the law is, what the facts are, those things, whole lot more beyond that. Then I think, beyond just that floor of what the rules of professional responsibility require, there are a lot of unwritten rules, right? That if you look at our oath of attorney in South Dakota, it talks about avoiding offensive personality. Lawyers shouldn't be jerks. That's an important unwritten rule. I think lawyers, even though we're not required to, should think about how we serve and care for our community, right? How do you give back to your community by pro bono work, by work for people who need something but can't pay for it? How do you find your opportunity to be in positions of service outside the law through service to your school board, your church, those kinds of things? How do you lead? For us, those core values of excellence, service, leadership that we talk about at the law school really, I hope, guide every decision our students make, that our alumni make. And those go quite a ways beyond that floor of the unethical conduct that the rules of professional responsibility put in place and that maybe Saul Goodman forgot about.
Wow, the way you talk, it makes me want to kind of be like a lawyer. It's like studying this law stuff. I'm like, it's kind of cool. Because this year I was kind of dabbing into it because my daughter, so she watched a bunch of these shorts. So this is what she'll watch. She'll watch some stuff with like about doctors, and she'll watch some lawyer stuff because there's some cool like shorts how they do. So this is what she says. She wants to be. She's only like 9, I think. She says she wants to be an orthopedic surgeon or a lawyer. And, my wife is like, follow your dreams, this and that. I'm like, yeah, follow your dreams as long as it makes you money. I'm okay. Follow them. Now she could do whatever she wants. But we were watching a lot of those shorts with like the law, like, hey, one of the examples, I think this is a prime example. Like if I don't know, if you're in a case with like a cop or they're trying to arrest you, they say, hey, don't say anything until you get a lawyer or something like that. I think that's what they recommend. I don't know. Something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, you have a absolute right to silence if you are questioned by law enforcement. And I would tell anyone to exercise that right. And I say that as someone who, I was in private practice. I talked about doing civil rights defense for state and local governments. I've represented highway patrol, sheriffs, local police departments. I have tremendous respect for the work they do. But, if someone is being investigated for a crime, again, the human component, there can be mistakes, right? And you want to assert that right to silence, which we put in the Constitution for a good reason, right? We want to have people have that expertise of a lawyer walking them through how they respond to those circumstances.
Throughout your years, have you ever seen like a trial where you're like, I don't know, that should have been the other way around? The only thing I could give an example, because everyone talks about it, is like the O.J. Simpson one. I don't know what your opinions on that one.
Yeah, I mean, the Simpson trial was going on when I was in law school. It was really fascinating. There's a great documentary by Ezra Edelman called Made in America that I think I would recommend to anyone. It's long, but it really puts OJ's life and that trial in the larger context of race relations and law enforcement in Los Angeles at that time. So there's a lot around the OJ verdict that you can dig into. There's a 9-hour documentary. I'd tell you to go there. The question of, are there verdicts that are wrong? Yeah, for sure. Right. I mean, the reality we know if we got to trial is there are disputes of fact and law, meaning there's more than one picture of this story. The facts, I'll put that in quotes for a section, are human perceptions. And we know that when any two humans watch the same event or they read the same thing, their takeaways are going to be different. Memories are different. And so the law isn't infallible. And are there verdicts that could have gone the other way? Yeah, most of them, right? We wouldn't have gotten to trial if this was a sure thing. I remember Years ago, I tried a contract dispute, or started to try a contract dispute back in my hometown. And we got through the first witness, and we took a break, and my client said to me, he said, "I see what you're saying. There are two sides to this deal." He had the epiphany that there were more than one, version of events, and we settled the case during the break because he finally got it. And there are instances, I think they're infrequent, where juries just get it wrong.
Mm.
Judges just get it wrong. That's what the appeal process is for. And I think most times the law gets it right, but what's right a lot of times is debatable.
How reliable are eyewitness accounts? Because is it possible, like, to get like a group of people to frame someone that they're all lying, or is it kind of reliable?
So, affirmatively frame someone to try and purposefully convict an innocent person, I think, is fortunately profoundly rare. How often are eyewitness accounts unreliable? Very often. So, just start with flaws of perception. If you have someone who saw a criminal event, let's say that it's D-Days and there's a fight outside one of the bars downtown, and somebody says, officer, I saw the whole thing. Well, they did, but it was at midnight and the lighting is fuzzy, right? And they had been in the bar themselves, and maybe they'd had a beer or two, and there's an impact on that. Maybe that's stressful and it affects their ability to perceive and remember. That happens a lot in shootings, right? The people who watched it are stressed themselves. So there's a lot of psychological literature out there. Annette Loftus is one of the people who's written about this a lot. She's a frequent expert witness on eyewitness observations. They can be very flawed. Eyewitness accounts can be very flawed for a whole variety of reasons, none of which are nefarious, right? And so that's some of what trial is about.
Oh, okay. And then to become not a jury, a judge, how does someone become that? Because is a judge also a person that they're also a lawyer?
Yep. Judges are lawyers. There are some states that have local justices of the peace that do really small things, mostly at the municipal city level, that don't have to be lawyers. That's kind of unusual, but they do exist. So to become a judge, there are two paths, depending on the state, primarily. And South Dakota allows both of these. So in South Dakota, most judges are appointed by the governor. So let's say, for example, there is an opening here in the first judicial circuit. South Dakota has 7 judicial circuits, and one of the judges retires. The State Judicial Qualifications Commission, which is made up of a couple lay people, some judges and lawyers, will meet with candidates who submit their application. They will evaluate those folks' application to make sure that they have the capability and ethical responsibility to be recommended to the governor. And then Governor Roden will interview or not. There's no requirement that interview, but typically, governors do as many or as few of those folks as he wants to, and then he appoints them. The other way you can become a judge is you can actually run for the position. That is not uncommon in some of the bigger jurisdictions like Sioux Falls and Rapid City. There are some contested elections for most commonly open slots, or sometimes people will run against a sitting judge. And there have been a few who've lost, but most times those folks are successful. But you either get appointed or elected, and that's pretty common across the United States.
Okay. Does a judge have I'm trying to see if I can say the right words. Do they have more, I guess, power? Saying hey, well, for example, during a trial, I'm going to say, I'm listening to everything. Well, I decide this. Or is there another, I don't know, what's the word, a diplomatic or democratic process? Or do they say, hey, no, I decide what's going to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the general setup, if we have a jury trial, is that the jury decides what the facts are. So to go back to our contract dispute, right? The jury would decide, well, was there a contract that Neil and Jose signed? the judge would tell the jury what the law is in South Dakota that says, what's a contract? What do you have to do to demonstrate there's a contract? Which is generally you have to have an offer. I'll fix your house if you pay me $1,000. You have to have acceptance where you say, yep, we'll do that, right? And so that's kind of what a contract is. The judges then also make decisions about evidence that comes in and out during the trial. All of those things are guided by law that's written down. Evidentiary decisions are guided by the rules of evidence. You know, the law of contract is set by statute and court decisions in South Dakota. So does the judge have power? They do, but it's constrained by the law that applies to them. The jury is in some way has more, or at least different power, because they're deciding these factual questions and they're guided by what the law is that they've got to answer and their assessment of what evidence is more or less credible.
And you guys do mock trials at the law school too, right?
Yeah, we do. We do both mock trial at the trial level. We also do simulations of alternative dispute resolution, mediations, where you sit down and have a neutral party kind of hear both claims and try and guide people to one of these agreed resolutions. We do what we call moot court, which is appellate practice, where once a decision's been made at the trial level, somebody's appealed it to the appellate level, either to say there were errors of fact or law that the appellate court has to decide. And so we do all of those things. Students participate in different ones kind of based on what they're interested in.
Oh, okay. That's really cool. So when you're a lawyer and, someone hires you and you represent them, do you have to, I guess, if they tell you, oh, well, I want, for example, I want to dispute this claim and I want like $100,000 from this person and this and that. Do you as a person representing them, do you have to listen to them, or can you be like, no, here, this is the best decision, or hey, you know what, fine, he's paying me and let me see what I could do? How does that kind of work?
Yeah. So, going back to those rules of professional responsibility we talked about, there are some decisions that are totally the client's. So, in the criminal setting, whether to plead guilty or not, whether to have a jury trial or not, same on the civil side, whether to initiate a lawsuit, whether to settle a lawsuit, totally the client's decision. Although the lawyers, obviously, they're giving them advice and recommendations, but those are decisions the client make. And then on the other side, there are decisions within the representation that are totally the lawyers. So if I'm representing you in a trial, you don't hand me a note with the list of questions to ask. You can, but I can use it or not. Like, that's totally the lawyers. The reality is a lot of the decisions are in consultation, right? You're going to have a conversation with your client about, hey, Jose, I think this is a claim that has real potential. This is one that doesn't. This is a case we should settle. This is a case we should take to trial. So you're really, if you go to your doctor, he's or she is going to give you some recommendations about what your options are, and you're going to decide what the best course of action is. The same is true with lawyers. There are some limits, though, ultimately, right, that a lawyer can't pursue a lawsuit or a claim or represent a fact that doesn't have an arguable in good faith basis in law or fact. So if you tell me, hey, I want to file a contract claim against my contractor, I have to do some investigation. I can't just completely take your word for it and determine that, yep, there's at least an argument here. I don't have to know we're going to win, but I have to at least have an argument that under the law and facts that we've got them, there's a claim here to assert.
Okay, that's why get the facts first before you start doing everything else.
Yep. Yeah.
So now we talked about a lot of law stuff, but what else do you do? I know, you're the dean, and this is how I see you guys up here. My wife hates it. My wife hates it when I say, man, I see all these people up here and I'm talking to all these people. But what's your day usually like? Besides, I know you go to the gym.
Yeah. So, you see a significant part of it, which is most mornings I'm at the gym early on and trying to take care of myself, like taking care of athletic or activities has been a part of my life, man, for as long as I can remember. So that's always good. Go to the law school during the day, and, that part of the day can be any sorts of things, right? It, is working with faculty, it's working with students, it's working with the larger university, it's working with lawyers and judges out in the world. That's just, what's on the agenda today for the law school. That's a lot of it. So then when I go home, I go home to my wife, Molly, who's also a native South Dakotan. She's an artist, grew up out west. And we go home to our 3 boys, Kale, Podrick, and Finian. And, in the evenings, a lot of life revolves around what those guys are up to. Maybe Kale's got a show choir concert, or this fall he'll be off in college. Podrick might have a wrestling tournament. Finian has got baseball and other stuff. So a lot of life revolves around them. Molly and I have always loved being outside. In the summertime, we like to get out and hike and do things. And we like to get back to, the parts of the world that our family's from. Her folks are out in the Black Hills. My folks ranch in central South Dakota. And so getting back there is a significant part of what we do too.
Oh, so you guys are all Midwesterners.
Yeah, we both native South Dakotans. I grew up a mile south and a mile west of a little town called Miller. So if you know where Pierre is, the state capital, go 70 miles east of there and you'll get to Miller. Go a mile south of town, a mile west of town, you'll get to my mom and dad's place. And then you can go a little south of that to my oldest brother Mark's place. And you can go east of town to my brother Paul's place. And they're still back there with their kids farming and ranching. We had a brother Brian who passed away years ago, lived down by Valentine, Nebraska. And he raised performance horses. We all rodeoed growing up. And so
that's so cool.
Yeah, so Brian did that down there too.
Have you guys ever been to the Fort Worth Stock Show?
I have not. All my brothers have. Yeah. Brian did rodeoing. Mark's been down there before. Paul's been to Fort Worth, but my family, my mom's dad, Art Cowan, was one of the first people who started the South Dakota Rodeo Association in South Dakota with some other people. My family's been around rodeo for, I'm going to get this wrong, Mom will yell at me, at least 4 generations if I'm not counting right. And so there's probably been a Fulton and a rodeo from Oregon to Texas to South Dakota to as far back east as Illinois and places like that all across the country.
And you need to head down there. That is cool. I'm trying to take, so Myra hasn't been there, and my daughter, surprisingly, I haven't took her there, and we're trying to make plans because it's usually, I think it's in January. So I'm going to try to take her there because I think it's cool. It's huge. It's big. Yeah. It's amazing. It's really, it's fun.
Yeah.
I like it.
I know my brother Mark went and loved Fort Worth. I've been to some incredible rodeos. I've been to the national finals a couple times when Brian was in it. I've been to Cheyenne Frontier Days, which I would tell anyone, if you really want to go see a rodeo, go to Cheyenne for Frontier Days. It's unlike anything else you'd ever seen. I was actually there when, there's a famous bull rider named Lane Frost was killed. I was across the arena when that happened. Oh. So lots of cool rodeos out there to go to. And there's some really cool ones just here in South Dakota. Fort Pierre has a long running rodeo over the 4th of July. That's amazing. Irene, pretty close by, has got a cool rodeo. Out west, Belfouche over the 4th of July has got a great rodeo. Lots of cool places in South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, other places to see rodeos.
Is that why I see rodeo in the law school on y'all social media? We
have a rodeo team. Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah. We a few years ago, a couple students, Peyton Sexton was one of them from up north. And we had a female student who both had eligibility yet. Opal Harkins was from Montana originally, and they want to continue college rodeoing. And they need an advisor because to college rodeo, you have to have a team and an advisor. And they knew I'd rodeoed. And so I was their advisor. And Sydney First just graduated, and she's been rodeoing for us. We don't have anybody right now, but a guy who's a rodeo coach up at Mitchell Tech actually emailed me and said, "Hey, call me. I think I might have another person for you." So longstanding tradition of rodeo at USD, and the law school has been carrying that on for a while.
What? So lawyer, dean, rodeo, ranch, man, snap. Anything else? What else do you do?
I don't know rodeo anymore. I rodeoed for a long time, but there are 197 accredited law schools in the United States. And I always tell people it's it's not very often that you're the only, but I'm pretty confident I'm the only law school dean who is a state high school steer wrestling champion. So
there you go. Take that. Take that. Now, before, because we're about to hit that hour, and I do want to cut it at an hour. Any events or anything coming up for the law school or all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing right now is we've been, in kind of a 5-year cycle of renovating the law school. So right after graduation, we cleared out the dean suite, which is on the second floor of the law school, and we've got workers in there starting to gut that out, and we're going to renovate that. So that's our last phase of renovation. Huge thank you to President Gestrine, Brian Limoges, and other folks at facilities for helping us get through this. We got a great building that just kind of needed some updating, and we're doing that. And then, for us, orientation is the first week of August. And so Katie and I had a meeting earlier this week, kind of about where we're at on enrollment, additional decisions on people that are coming in, whether we think we're too big or not, a good problem to have, whether we need to cut off applications. Cool. And pretty soon we'll start, getting ready for orientation seriously that first week of August. State Bar Convention is out in Rapid City this year, where all the lawyers in South Dakota have a chance to get together. And that's a pretty significant obligation in mid-June. And then, for Molly and those 3 boys we talked about, we've got baseball and wrestling camps and hiking trips and a guy getting ready to go off to college. So that'll be a lot of the summer too.
Sweet. All right. It's going to be a nice summer, hopefully, besides the rain. But I won't talk about the weather. I already talked about it too much.
We need something in between 90 degrees and 40 degrees. That'd be great.
I'll take that. Sweet. All right. I think this is where we end it, but I do want to thank you so much, Neil.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.